This is for our baby from Jordan to Macario.